So, would have been back around 1973, and I would have been, well, 10 that year, but I would have still been 9 years old at this time. And my mom, one day, out of the blue, surprised me with a copy of Wildlife, the Paul McCartney Wings album. Actually, it was an 8-track tape, which was pretty wonderful, and she used to do things like that for me. She's a wonderful mom. I miss her more than anything in the world every day. But she brought that home one day, and I was all excited. And at this point, I had gone Beatle crazy probably within the last 6 months to a year. It was, a little kid trying to get my hand on all the Beatle records I could get. Didn't really have any of their solo records at that point. Didn't even know that much about their solo output. I knew Uncle Albert, My Sweet Lord, Imagine, maybe It Don't Come Easy, but that's pretty much all I knew. And I had just gotten Beatles albums that I had that my brothers had left behind when they went off to school and stuff, and then whatever I could get my parents to buy for me. So I was excited to get this Paul solo album, and I was expecting sort of I don't know, Hey Jude and Let It Be, Abbey Road, Sergeant Pepper, that sort of Paul McCartney type songs. And I listened to it and was sorely disappointed would be an understatement. Just sort of, what in the world is this crap? Which actually put me off of buying, besides the fact that I was a kid and didn't have any money, but put me off of looking into and buying the solo Beatle albums for another 3 years or so, 2 or 3 years at least. I did get some 45s that my dad or mom got me of Mind Games and Jet, You're 16 and Photograph, but didn't get into the albums until probably around 6th or 7th grade, solely because of Wildlife being so god awful. And back then, of course, when you got an album, it's not like you went out and bought a bunch of albums when you were a kid. You just got an album or 45 here and there, so you devoured and just poured over it. So I got to know Wildlife like the back of my hand, and I gave it chance after chance. And other than a song or two, I just thought it was awful, and eventually gave up on it. I don't know whatever happened to that 8-track tape, but years later, decades later, really, I went back and revisited the album after having not listened to it or heard it or paid attention to it. I didn't buy a replacement copy till a long time later. Went back and listened to the album, and all of a sudden it's like, well, okay, it's not his greatest thing he's ever done, but this is kind of funky and just sort of thrown together and interesting and not half bad. So in the years since then, I've come to kind of love that album a little bit, and it's not his best solo album. It's certainly not as good as the Beatles stuff, but I've got a soft spot and quite a bit of love in my heart for that album nowadays, especially when the deluxe box set came out a couple of 2 or 3 years back, and that I had already sort of come around to liking it by that time, but that even bolstered my love for the album a little bit more there. So fast forward to, I'd say, early 77. I'm in 8th grade, 7th grade or 8th grade, 7th grade actually, because that would have been the 76, 77 school year, so this would have been 76. And the Rolling Stones, I knew who they were, of course. I knew, Mick Jagger, kind of Brian Jones, just because he had died, and I remember my older brothers and my cousin and their friends talking about that. I was only 6 or 5 or 6 when that happened, so it didn't really mean anything to me, but I remember the name, just like I remember a year or so later when Jimmy and Janice and Jim Morrison died, and hearing about that, even though I was a little kid and didn't really knew Satisfaction, of course. I knew Paint It Black, I even remember that being a new song and liking it, even though I was probably all of 3 or 4 years old when that came out. Remember Honky Tonk Woman being all over the radio, and I remember Angie being on the radio a few years later when I was a little bit older. It's Only Rock and Roll being on the radio. Knew they were contemporaries of the Beatles and was sort of aware of the whole Beatles versus Stones and all that good stuff. And thought, the only records I had of them were, again, when my brothers went off to school and whatnot. They left a lot of their stuff behind at home, including a lot of records, box of 45s, a lot of Beatle 45s, some Monkees, some other bands, but there was Honky Tonk Woman and Get Off My Cloud 45s in there, so I really like those. And it's in the back of my mind that one of these days I need to look into the Rolling Stones and kind of investigate further to see what they're all about. Well, 7th grade, a friend of mine in school, I don't know how it came up, but I said something about the Rolling Stones, or he said something about them, and said that I was wanting to look into them. He said, I've got a Rolling Stones record, and I don't really like to be honest. If you want it, you can have it. Sure, bring it to school tomorrow. Turned out that his older brother had either bought it or got it as a present or something when it was brand new. He didn't like it much, so he gave it to Brian. Brian played it. He didn't like it much, so Brian gave it to me. I took it home and played it, and I thought, what the hell is this crap? I didn't like it much. I ended up giving it to John, another buddy of mine who lived next door to me growing up. He thought, he'd heard of the Rolling Stones too, and we all had, but he thought, who are these ridiculous looking people on the cover, and look at that guy with the huge mouth and goofball. And he played the record. He thought it was crap and said, yeah, the band sucks. And he ended up, I remember, don't know why, but he ended up coloring the record with Crayolas and putting it on his little sister's little toy record player. Wasn't any good for the record player or the record, and then eventually I guess he just threw it away. I don't know. But funny thing is that he went on to be a huge Rolling Stones fan. In fact, that's his favorite band, where my favorite band is the Beatles, and his number 2 is the Beatles, and my number 2 is actually the Kinks. But I love the Rolling Stones. So anyway, so I went on to become a huge Rolling Stones fan not too long after. What happened was, one day on the radio, DJ played Ruby Tuesday. I fell in love instantly. I'd never heard the song before that I could remember. Surely I had, because it was a #1 song, but it was a #1 song when I was, again, 3 or 4. So I probably did hear it back then when it was a big thing, just didn't pay much attention. But I fell in love with Ruby Tuesday. Got my dad to take me to a record store in downtown Fort Worth. That's was a neat store that's long gone now. Like a lot of good things are long gone. But got the 45, took it home, played it, loved it just as much as when I'd heard it on the radio the day or two before. Flipped the record over, let's spend the night together. Holy cow, man, I love that. Fell in love with that song to this day. Those are my 2 favorite Rolling Stones songs. Ruby Tuesday, followed by Let's Spend the Night Together. And Get Off My Cloud be number 3 if you're interested. But so not long after that, I got my mom or someone bought me Hot Rocks, which all these great Stones songs. And from there, went on to get the back albums. Beggar's Banquet, I think, was the first album I got. And then not long after that, Here Comes Miss You and Some Girls, and we'll get to that on the next video. But I never did really feel any urgency to go back and rebuy or revisit Black and Blue. And was years later, and I do remember when the album came out, I do remember Fool to Cry being on the radio. Not a whole lot, but it got some airplay. I don't remember any other songs of this album getting any airplay. Probably maybe they did and I wasn't paying attention, but I don't really remember it. Didn't feel any need to revisit Black and Blue, and it was a long time later until I did. So did, like with Wildlife, which I initially couldn't stand and later grew to love, did that happen with Black and Blue? Well, let's talk about it. And actually, I'll save you the suspense. Not really. Through the years, I have listened to this off and on, and I've never really warmed to it. It's probably, I don't know, they're past Undercover, so I kind of lost interest and stopped buying the albums, even though I heard them. So I'm not really overly familiar with the Bridges to Babylon and Steel Wheels and Voodoo Lounge and all those albums, so I can't really speak to those. But those aside, whether they're good or bad, probably the weakest album in the band's discography, I would say. A couple of good songs on here, but not an album I'm crazy about. But anyway, April 23rd, 1976, this was released on the world. Got to #1 in the United States, got to #2 in England, which oddly enough is the same chart placement that It's Only Rock and Roll, the album before this, experienced. So Mick Taylor is gone from the band, so this is a transitional album. They're trying to settle on. They need a new member, a new guitar player. A lot of people, Wayne Perkins, Harvey Mandel, used to be in Canned Heat, Ronnie Wood, of course, who ended up getting the job. Peter Frampton came through, Steve Marriott from Small Faces. All these people were trying out for the gig. Jeff Beck and Rory Gallagher showed up. I think that was more just having fun and hanging out. Kind of hard to imagine Jeff Beck truly wanting to join the Rolling Stones and, have to deal with being bossed around by Mick and Keith. So he seems too much of his own person to have really wanted that. But so yeah, you get Ron Wood does play on this album here and there, but you get other tracks with other guitarists, some of these people that were sort of hopefuls or trying out for the band. Keith plays, I think he doesn't play as much as he usually does on a record. He sings a lot and writes songs and stuff, but I think because they were trying other guitarists out, there's a lot more, the guitar duties getting picked up by other people rather than Keith, even though he does play, I think, guitar and piano here and there on the album. And got Billy Preston back, of course. I'm not sure if Nicky Hopkins is on this album or not. Some other extra session players around. So first thing, there's the cover, and I love this cover. This is a great cover. I love the just the placement and the composition of it. The fact that when you fold it out, you get the entire band there. So that's a good cover. They're not the most attractive people, are they? But that's a good shot and a great cover. Interestingly enough, this is the first this is the first album since Satanic Majesties with the band, picture of the band on the cover. I mean, you had them, you had Mick and Keith on the front and back of Goat's Head Soup, which oddly enough would be the same way it'd be with Tattoo You a few years later, wearing a pantyhose on their head for whatever reason. And then when you, in the gatefold of Goat Head Soup, you had the rest of the band also wearing panties on their head in some confused attempt of toying with cross-dressing, or maybe they were going to knock off a 7-Eleven or something. I'm not sure what that was all about. But so you only had Mick on the cover of Goat's Head. It's Only Rock and Roll had the band on the cover, but it was a painting or an artistic depiction. So this is the first time that you get an actual photograph of the band on the cover of one of their albums since 1967. So that's pretty cool, and it's a good picture. You got the gatefold, you've got another picture of the band. And I was watching some videos of Jeff Calico Silver. He was reviewed all the Rolling Stones albums and a lot of Dylan albums. Great channel, check it out, Calico Silver. But he was talking about this shot. This was taken on a beach in Florida somewhere, and he said back in those days, he lived like in this area, and if he would have known, he would have stopped by to say hi and have a cup of tea with the Rolling Stones, but he didn't. So there they are on the beach with waving sparklers or something around. I don't know. It's I guess it's okay picture. There's not not really that interesting. This is taken by a guy named Hiro. Not sure how you pronounce his name, but he's a famous Japanese fashion photographer that was a big deal back in the 60s and 70s. He's actually still around. He's like 99 now, but famous photographer. And for being a famous photographer, I don't know. I think pretty much anyone could have taken that picture. There's not much to it. It's all right. Doesn't seem like a proper Rolling Stones picture for some reason to me. This seems like something that would be more fitting for, I don't know, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, one of those type bands, Chicago maybe or something. You know, this proper Rolling Stones picture, more fitting. That's a great Rolling Stones picture for an inner sleeve from Sticky Fingers, or you know, the cover of Between the Buttons or something like that. This one, it's okay, but no big deal because it's a great cover, and the cover in many ways is probably the best part of the album, unfortunately. So this thing was recorded in Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, New York, kind of all over the place. They had hoped to have it out in time for their 1975 U.S. tour, which ended up not happening because of the loss of Mick Taylor and trying to find their new guitar player and all this stuff going on otherwise. So they ended up putting Made in the Shade out for the 75 tour, which was just a compilation, kind of a greatest hits compilation album, which would also be, I guess, the only time they ever toured without a new album, which, I mean, not counting, you know, after 95 when they stopped making albums and just kept touring forever, but when they were 100 years old. But I mean, as far as in their prime, I know Let It Bleed actually came out after the 1969 U.S. tour because of some delays, but they were playing songs from it and all. But so 75 tour, they didn't have a new album to promote, and this comes out the next year. Again, you've got the Stones following trends, really, more so than setting trends or anything. This album's is you got rock, disco, funk, Latin beats, reggae, just all the stuff that was popular in that time in the music world going on. So, yeah, I guess let's get into the songs, as it were. First song, side one, Hot Stuff. Harvey Mandel of Canned Heat plays the lead guitar on this. Song starts off well, but it loses steam pretty quick and becomes pretty humdrum song. It's a disco song. It's kind of a dry run in a way, I guess. They probably didn't know it at the time, but dry run for better disco songs that the band would do here in the next few albums. Much better songs. We'll get to those. But, you know, disco is supposed to be, and I was never a huge disco fan. I was more of a soul and funk and rock guy, but I guess, you know, some of it was okay. But it's supposed to be upbeat and energetic because you're supposed to get out there on the dance floor and turn the beat around and all that stuff. And this, while it starts off okay, it quickly becomes just sort of leaden and molasses paste, which is not a good thing for a disco song. It's pretty uninspired. It's too long at 5 minutes and 20 seconds. Too, maybe if it was shorter, maybe if the pace was picked up, it would have been a better song. I think it could have worked in that way. It got to number 49 in the United States, so not too well. I don't really remember ever hearing this on the radio at the time, but anyway. So, yeah, Hot Stuff. In the disco and dance song genre, they would do a lot better and had done better previously, too. But Hot Stuff is not so hot. It gets a 4 in my book. Probably deserves a 3, but I'll give it a 4. So, second song, Hand of Fate. This is Jagger trying to do a murder ballad, kind of trying to do the, you know, Johnny Cash shot a man in Reno just to watch him die, or Robert Johnson with, what's that, 60-40 Blues, shot my woman in half and all that kind of stuff that the Hanson family several decades later would specialize. Sort of a meaner version of Rocky Raccoon, Jagger talking about guy shot him once, but I shot him twice, and yeah, he's got the quintessential mid '70s Rolling Stones sound to it. It's a decent deep track. Not bad for what it is. I'll give it a 7. It's not terribly memorable, but when you're listening to it, it's enjoyable, and it's fairly solid. It's not one of their greatest, but lyrics are good. It's fun. Jagger is a cold-blooded murderer. I don't know about all that, but it's okay. It gets a 7. Next one is the only song on the album. Well, almost the only song on the album the band didn't write. It's a cover of Eric Donaldson, reggae guy, cover of his song Cherry O Baby. Jeff, in his review, Calico Silver, talked about albums and songs. If you ever have albums and songs that some days you can't stand them, some days you kind of like them. And this album, well, I don't much like this album, but certain songs on this album are like that. Every once in a while I'm in the mood for them. Very rarely. Most of the time I'm like, yeah, they're kind of rubbish. And this song's kind of like that. Stone's doing reggae, and they've done it quite a few times throughout their career to mixed results for the most part. Sometimes they're all right at it, usually not. It's always a bit comical, also, as Jeff said, to see, you know, these white English boys trying to play reggae music, no matter who they are. And the Police, a few years later, would make their bread and butter off of this stuff. Never was a huge Police fan. I liked a few of their songs, but the Clash too, they liked reggae, and they did quite a few reggae and dub songs. And the Clash do it. They do pretty well with it, by and large. But the Stones, they just do okay with it. This song's kind of annoying some days, kind of catchy on other days. It's maybe 60% bad, 40% good. I'll split the difference. I'll give Cherry Baby a 5. I don't know. It's dispensable, but nice enough that it's around, I guess. So, song number 4, Memory Motel. This is a fun song because it's a long song. It's like 7 minutes and change. You get Mick and Keith on lead, Mick taking lead for a while, Keith taking lead for a while. Get these wonderfully descriptive, poetic lyrics. The "She's Got a Mind of Her Own" refrain, that's Keith singing. It's always good. You always need a Keith song on the album, and I almost always love the Keith song on any album. So he doesn't have a song of his own per se, but he does have half of this one, I guess you could say. And so that's cool. He does it good. But like I said, really nice lyrics, just descriptive and paints a picture in your mind. She drove a pickup truck painted green and blue. The tires were wearing thin. She'd done a mile or two. When I asked where she was headed for, back to Boston, I'm singing in a bar. And so it's about a tryst, I guess, that Mick, in real life or just made up, had with a girl for one night or a short time, and didn't last. But he's looking back on it fondly now, or him and Keith both. I guess they both had a hand in writing the thing. But yeah, that's the strong song on the album. I think it's gets a 9 from me for Memory Hotel, and a lot of long songs on this, so I think you only get 4 songs per side. We turn over to side 2, and we get Hey Negrita. This song was written by Mick and Keith and inspired by Ron Wood, which is Rolling Stone speak for saying that these two greedy bastards didn't want to share songwriting credit with anybody or royalties, which has happened throughout the history of this band. But Wood apparently came up with the riff for the song. It's a fun. I like this song. It's doesn't really add up to much. It's just a big loud noise, but it's screamy, shouty, harsh, funky reggae. Jagger jumping around and shouting and acting a fool as he does so well. It's loose and it's fun. It's filler, but oh boy, what filler it is. It's way better than Hot Stuff. Hardly classic, but it's just a fun wail of a good time, and it's not really even a song you're gonna seek out on its own too often. But when you hear it, it's a smile, and it's a blast. It's a fun. One thing on this, because I guess they're trying new guitar players and all, this is more of the Stones' jam album in a lot of ways, just sort of loose and hanging out and playing and jamming and having fun and unpolished and rough around the edges. And hey, that's on tape. We got 8 songs. There's our album. So it's more that than a finished or polished album in a lot of ways. Almost kind of like a Grateful Dead album in some ways, or just one of those jam band type, loose and scruffy albums, which would be wonderful and have its charms if the songs were better. It's just that unfortunately most of the songs on this album are not up to Stone's snuff and quality. But yeah, Hey Negrita is a fun song. I love the piano bits, the guitar bits in it are a lot of fun. I'm going to give that one a 7. Now we go to second song on side 2, which is Melody, which is said to be inspired by Billy Preston. So again, not wanting to give any credit there, those tight-fisted bastards. But and Melody sounds a lot like an earlier Billy Preston song on one of his solo albums from a few years before. I don't remember which song, but nice piano on it, which no surprise because Preston's on the piano. It's a slinky shuffle, kind of a stair-step type vocal from Jagger, which is fun. Song starts off good. It's promising kickoff to the song, but pretty soon you kind of realize there's not a lot of stuff here, and the song overstays its welcome. It's kind of sounds like some drunk barflies at the end of the night that are falling off their stools and serenading Last Call, or stumbling out into the parking lot half asleep and drunk singing this. It's got some good horn parts in it that are tasty and nice. Jagger sort of mewling like a contented cat in heat toward the end of it. It's kind of fun. It's another kind of half lousy, half okay song, but enough interesting parts. It's kind of boring, but it does have interesting bits. Another one I'm not going to really go out of my way to listen to, but if I'm listening to it, I do enjoy the interesting bits. It's enough that I will give it a 6, and again, it would probably really be a 4 or 5 if I was more honest. Fool to Cry, like I said, that's one I remember hearing on the radio. That was the lead single off the album. Got to number 10 in America, number 6 over in England. I remember that being played, a good deal. I don't think not as much as It's Only Rock and Roll, and not as much as Angie, but it did get some airplay. So it's kind of a sweet song. Jagger singing from the perspective of several people, but starting off from his daughters, which at the time I guess he would have had 2 daughters, Jade and Kara, I think was the other one's name. He's since gone on to have about 40 kids with about 80 women, but back then I think he just had the 2 daughters. This is a song I remember hearing a story that they were playing it live, and Keith, I don't think, was a huge fan of the song, but he actually fell asleep in the middle of the song while they were on stage playing it, which may also be known as passing out from heroin, or maybe he just fell asleep. But anyway, it's a little bit dull and languid. It's a nice enough song. The tempo could have been changed a little bit, would have helped it. It's a little too long, could have been shorter. This is maybe it's a good late night song, if you just had hopped on a girl and you two were laying in bed afterwards or something. Might work for something like that. But doesn't, kind of seems like a Rolling Stones song a little bit, but in the all in all, it kind of doesn't. Seems like this would be a better fit of a song for, I don't know, Andy Gibb or Pablo Cruz, Al Stewart, somebody like that. It's okay. I'm gonna midpoint it and give Fool to Cry a 5. And then the album ends very uninspired with Crazy Mama, which is just a washed out, tedious 70s sounding generic rock song. Lyrics are fairly good and interesting, kinda. Maybe Janis Joplin could have made something out of this. Been a little difficult since she was dead by 1976, but maybe if she would have gotten hold of it, she could have done something. The Stones' Hands, though, it's pretty bland. I give it a 3. This album overall, I'm gonna go 5.5. And I pull it out and listen to it maybe once every 3 or 4 years. I kind of have weird reason get in the mood for it. Other than that, I just don't pay much attention to it. It's got a nice cover though, like I said, so it's got that going for it. And Lester Bangs, the great rock critic who wrote for Cream and Rolling Stone before that, and great writer also outside of writing about reviewing rock records, said the heat's off, it's all over, they don't matter anymore or stand for anything, and what a relief. And a few people gave this good reviews, but by and large it got bad reviews. And this is one of the times when one of those instances where I'd pretty much be in agreement with the critics. It's kind of an unfocused, just not very interesting mess of an album with a few sprinkled highlights here and there, but not enough, and the songs just aren't that good. So, but it wasn't all over. The Stones would still have a few surprises up their sleeves, and there would be some good albums to come for a time anyway. We'll get to all that. But Black and Blue, nah. You know, if you don't know much about the Stones and you're looking to get into them, definitely this isn't the place to start. They did a lot better before and a lot better afterwards, but that's that. So be back with some girls. Wish I had some girls right now, but it's a different topic for a different time. Have a good weekend, take care, and can't think of anything else to say, so bye bye.